Caduce.
It's saying that God's glory is reflected in everybody, not just humans or not just specific religions,
So like what else?
like animals or Jews or other religions.
Animals?
Other religions, all different kinds of people.
All different kinds of people.
Yeah, life forms.
Living and non-living? What else?
Everything.
Sacred rocks or
Sacred rocks? What do you guys think? Anybody over here? God's glory is reflected in... Yes? Life? Nature? Nature's a big word here. Haley, do you have something? Okay. You guys are not being helpful.
Maybe nature.
So, nature. That's what Jackson said. Yeah. Okay, so as a table, look at that affirmation and figure out a way to say it a lot simpler. Okay? And then put it in that box on the left. See what you can do. See what you can come up with.
No,
What did you come up with?
celebrating everything in God's creation.
Sorry. That was a really loud whistle.
Ava, I'm going to take your phone.
What'd you come up with?
Celebrating everything in God's creation. Basically celebrating everything.
Celebrating everything in God's creation. And everything would obviously include a lot. So God's creation, I mean, everything that God created isn't just nature, it could be other things as well. So what did you guys have?
Oh, I said God is everywhere.
What?
God is everywhere.
God is everywhere.
Yeah, that's
There's a word for that. You know the word?
world. Scattered.
The word is omnipresent.
What's that? Yeah, what is that?
It means that God is everywhere.
omni is one, right? Or all.
All. Luke, you got something?
Uh-huh. Being thankful for God's Spirit and all of His creation.
Okay. Jay?
I have celebrating everything God created and His Spirit. And His Spirit, sorry.
Okay. What you guys have?
Yes, read it. It's yours. I'm not reading. You do it, Jack.
Angie's phone.
Dana.
God's spirit is shown through nature, including animals of all kinds. It doesn't need to be living either.
Okay. What you guys have?
Celebrating God's glory is reflected in everything.
Nice. Do you guys have something?
God's glory is reflected in everything, everyone, and everyone. Yeah.
Okay. So in this affirmation, what we're going to talk about the most is the environment. So we're going to talk a lot about nature. We're going to talk a lot about creation, and those kind of things are kind of interchangeable.
Is that
Yes.
where we went last year on that to the power plant? Water?
Actually, so there's a lot of overlap in these affirmations, and there are different sections where we talk about nature, and that was actually, we were doing prayer, and we just happened to be doing a walking meditation out in the park. So I'm a pretty big nature lover. Some people call me a tree hugger. I don't know that they're complimenting me when they say that, but I enjoy God's creation, and actually I've had experiences, and I'll tell you about some of them tonight. Hey guys, what are you doing? What? Doing a thing? Let's do this thing. Oh, the attendance? Okay. So we're going to talk a lot about the environment, and we're also going to talk about problems in the environment, because that's something we all need to know. So we're going to be looking at what Faith and Environment Committee does, and you're going to hear from some guest speakers about, some things that are going on in the world. So do you guys think that the environment is in danger? Does anybody think that the environment's in danger? Okay. Because it is, and that's good. I'm glad you're aware. So we're going to talk about some of those things. Yes?
In science class, our teacher is a very big environmentalist. And he likes to talk to us about global warming and stuff, and it's in big danger. I mean, like, next 50 years.
Yeah, it's not looking good. The CO2 in the atmosphere.
The cows poop.
So we're going to start in Genesis. If you have your Bible, you can open to Genesis 1:31, or you can look on the board. And what does that say? This is at the end of the creation account, which basically every day there was a new part of creation being made. And then at the end of this creation account is verse 131, and it says, God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. Have you ever made something? Have you ever made a piece of artwork or a Lego city, or
I made cookies the other day.
made cookies? And did you make something, Jay? Honor roll. I don't think you made the honor roll in the technical sense of the term. You got on the honor roll, but you weren't the one that created the honor roll. Yes?
I made a video for English class.
Yeah.
Hey,
Okay, so are there times when you make something that's really cool, and you, when you're done with it, you go, hey, this is really cool? Does anybody have that experience? Yeah?
Me and Ava made borax slime, and it was actually pretty fun.
Did you, and when you finished it, were you like, hey, that's cool?
Yeah.
I made a drawing on my brother's whiteboard. It's really cool.
Yeah?
and they made me this.
Okay. So, I think this shows that God was pleased with what God had made. And that includes, this is actually written after the part about creating people. So all nature is in place, all the plants, all the animals, the birds, the fish, and the people. And I think it's important to see that it says very good. God thought it was very good. So God has a heart for the creation that God made. Just play with your board later.
Yeah, don't touch my board.
And then in Genesis 2, this is one of my favorite verses because I think it really proves God's love. And if you went on the wilderness trip over the summer, you probably would have heard this verse. But Genesis 2:9 says, out of the ground the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. So the interesting part, I think, is that God could have easily made everything very utilitarian, you know. Obviously, we eat plants. You probably ate a plant today, some of you. And you may not have even known it. But plants are good for food. That's what we live on. And God could have just made like this kind of plant that would produce fruit, but wouldn't necessarily be that appealing. But in this verse, it says that they were pleasing to the eye and good for food. So to me, that says when I see something in nature that's pleasing to my eye, I have to go, oh, that's cool. God did that, and God didn't have to do that. But God did that for you. Maybe for the things that you've seen in nature that you go, wow, that's spectacular. Look at the bottom of your page. There's a picture actually from our hike this summer in Colorado. That's our group right there, the junior high group. And this is at this pass where we came up this gradual grassy knoll or grassy pass, and it was huge. And as you come up, as you gain the elevation and are coming over this pass, all the Rocky Mountains, like to the north, just kind of rose before us, And so we got on this pass, and you could just see forever. The weather was perfect. The bugs were killing us, but we didn't care. Yes, we did. But you could see, I mean, I seriously don't know if I've seen a view that cool. It was, and I've been in the outdoors a lot. I've gone on a lot of hikes, been on a lot of mountains, ocean, and that was the coolest view to come up. And there's just this grassy area overlooking just spectacular mountains. So it was incredible, and to just to know that like that's God's creative work in action to make you feel good, maybe. I mean, for other purposes too, but for your pleasure. So, has anybody else had a cool experience like that in nature, or a cool something you've seen that's really cool? Well, just write a little thought. Genesis creation account. What does God say about creation? And then we're gonna look at a little more specific part of creation. So the top box there, what do you think God's saying about creation? And this also goes to why we need to protect it, right? So like if God's heart is all about God's creation, then if we crap on it, then that's not very good. I mean, sometimes you have to, just in the true nature sense of it. This part here is from a book called Exodus. So in Exodus, the people of Israel were enslaved, and they were enslaved by Egypt. And they did a lot of manual labor while they were in Egypt, and it was kind of brutal. So the people would cry out to their God all the time, and God heard them and spoke to Moses. Has anybody heard of Moses? A couple of you? No? No Moses? No Moses? Yes, Moses? And so, gotcha. Got it. Thank you. And this is what he said to Moses. Have you guys heard of what's called the Promised Land? Yeah? Okay. You've heard of the Promised Land? Okay. So while they were held captive in Egypt, God promised Moses that they were going to go to the Promised Land. And this is what he says. The land you are entering to take over is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come, where you planted your seed and irrigated by foot as in a vegetable garden. But the land you are crossing the Jordan to take possession of is a land of mountains and valleys, and it drinks rain from the heaven. Now this is God talking to Moses. And you can tell just in what he's saying that he really feels like strongly about this area. So actually God feels strongly about this particular area. And it's not a very big area. It's about as long as the state of Nebraska is north to south. And it's about as wide as from Omaha to not very far into Iowa. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and pools of water, with springs flowing in the valleys and the hills, a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing. A land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. It's a good land. It has everything. I mean, those are all the basic ingredients to life and to industry. And it says, I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and broad land, And I bet you, have you ever heard this line? A land flowing with milk and honey. Have you ever heard that before? Now, there weren't like rivers of milk and pools of honey that you dip your biscuits into. What it meant was the land was really sweet. And I'm going to show you what we're talking about here. Let's see. Don't you love when we do Google Earth? Oh, I guess we can't do Google Earth. That's a bummer. So I'm going to show you Egypt. Directions to Egypt. Okay, so this is Egypt. Do you guys see it? Here, I'll turn the lights off. Okay, so maybe we'll go a little closer. What do you notice about Egypt? What? White? Dry. So Egypt is fairly dry, right? I mean, this is the Nile River here. But as an area, it's pretty dry. So God told Moses that they were going to leave Egypt. And we're not exactly sure where in Egypt they were. It's a pretty big area. And they were going to cross the Red Sea, which is right here.
Wait, what's the green area? Like the patch of green?
Yeah, the green is the Nile River basin. So around the Nile River is where you'd have the most vegetation in Egypt.
No, why don't they just go live there?
Because God had a promised land for them.
Oh, sorry.
So, and because they were enslaved in Egypt. They were slaves. And they were getting beaten and killed. Okay, so God has a conversation with Moses over here in Egypt. And they actually crossed the Red Sea right around here. You see that? And so then they wander in the desert in this area, which also looks very dry, doesn't it? This is called the Negev Desert, and it's very dry. And so eventually they're led to the Promised Land, which, as you can tell, this is the Promised Land right here. It extends from this is the Dead Sea. Haley, get a hold of yourself. Jeez. From the Sea of Galilee up here, and here's the mountainous regions with Mount Hermon. And then this is the Sea of Galilee, which was like this beautiful, almost like a lake, a big lake. And the Jordan River flows right down the middle of the Promised Land into the Dead Sea.
Can't you float in the Dead Sea?
You can float in the Dead Sea because it's very salty. And the reason it's that way is because water only comes into the Dead Sea but doesn't go out. So there's no life in it. It's kind of like Salt Lake, Great Salt Lake.
The Great Salt Lake is really nasty.
It's nasty, yeah. So is the Dead Sea. So you also have the coast here along the ocean. And do you notice what color this is?
Green.
It's green. So this is like, if you look in this area, this is like one of the most fertile places in the whole area. Because if you take a step back, I mean, look at all this desert out here. And this is one of the reasons that people fight over this area even today. I mean, because it's still the nicest area in the region, you know. So other people wanted it, of course. And so this is the land. And it says in another passage that God had his eye on this land for his people. And there was another condition put on the people to be in that land, that they had to worship God and not worship other gods. And so if they did that, if they would worship God and not worship other gods, they could stay in the land. It was called that's called a conditional covenant, like a conditional promise. If you keep up your end of the deal, I'll keep up my end of the deal. Unlike God's love, which is not conditional. You know, God loves you no matter how much you screw up. And you can't do anything to get away from that. But this condition, living in this land, was conditional. And do you know if they kept their part of the bargain? Not so good, which is not surprising.
Stop Trump.
So, in the next box, you're going to write, what does God say about the land? A lot of Psalms that have that talk about nature and creation. So you're going to look in the Psalms and find a verse that talks about nature, creation, land, that kind of stuff, okay? So Psalms is right in the middle of the Bible. Just plop it open to the middle and look for a Psalm. And then we're going to share.
He turns a desert into pools of water, a parched land into springs of water.
Cool.
We're soaking.
Oh, you're all together?
We are. But then we accidentally
Group effort?
Okay, I'll say it. My room.
Yeah.
Sherry's got sports.
Even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you.
That's cool. About night and day. Did you ever consider night and day to be part of God's creation?
It is.
It is. Do you have something different?
It's dark all the time. Oh, yeah. So, like, the darkness is at the
His lightnings light up the world, the earth sees and trembles, the mountains melt like wax before the Lord.
Okay. Luke, what'd you get?
Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. For he has founded it on the seas and established it on the rivers.
Nice. Pass. Did you guys find one? Keep looking. They're in there. Did you find one?
Yeah, she did.
In the heavens he has set tent for the sun.
Ooh, a tent for the sun. That's gotta be a big tent. Can you imagine how big of a tent that is? Do you know how big the sun is?
Big.
At a tent, wouldn't that just burn up? What'd you get? All right, you've talked already. We'll go to Lauren.
Someone already read
That's all right.
The earth is in the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. For he has founded it on the seas and established it on the rivers.
Nice. I think Luke read that. What'd you get?
I had you.
Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord guards the city, the guard keeps watch in vain.
All right. What'd you get, Abby?
The heavens is yours and also is the earth.
Oh, the heavens is yours. What do you think the heavens is? What do you think the heavens is? What? The heavens. Is that like in our galaxy or is it farther away? Yes?
I feel like heaven is wherever you want it to be.
We're stepping up.
Heaven is wherever you, but what, in this passage, what does the heavens mean?
I haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah.
Afterlife.
For God, the afterlife.
Well, like people sometimes say like heaven is sometimes is on earth, but also people relate earth to being as hell as well. So it's how you see it in your eyes, how you see it in your perspective.
But in the passage, it means like afterlife.
Yeah, maybe. Could include that. Okay.
Who shall ascend in the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place?
Very nice. The hill of the Lord. Okay. So obviously, like all throughout the Bible, there's these nature scenes, and if you read the Psalms, a lot of them have to do with nature. So I think there's a huge emphasis in the Bible on God's creation, and since there is, and since it's all talked about so positively, I think we're really called to take care of it and appreciate it and enjoy it. So when I was like 19, I was hiking the Long Trail, which is like a backpacking trail, kind of like we did this summer. And it goes from the state line of Massachusetts and Vermont, and it actually goes up to Canada. It's a 300-mile trail. And it goes over the tallest mountain in Vermont. Anybody know what that's called?
Mount Vermont.
No.
That's a good guess. That's what I would guess.
It's called Mount Mansfield. It's where the ski resort Stowe is. And we happened to get to the campsite on the summit of Mount Mansfield just about at sunset. And so we threw our stuff in our shelter, and the guy I was hiking with was tired. But I was like, I'm going to the top of this mountain and just see what it's like up on the peak. And I got to the top, it wasn't quite sunset yet, but it was so clear. And from the top of that mountain, I could see the buildings of Montreal in Canada. I could see the White Mountains in New Hampshire, because the Green Mountains are in Vermont. So you could see all the White Mountains in New Hampshire. You could see this mountain in Massachusetts, Mount Greylock. And on the other side in New York, you could see all the Adirondacks. And I recognized all these things, and I was like, oh my gosh, this was a profound moment for me. And I was on this mountain by myself. There was nobody else on the top. And all of a sudden, I just felt this wave of peace come over me, It was like, it was a combination of feeling so small, like a grain of rice on the top of this mountain. And then if I'm a grain of rice, it's like my problems are even smaller. You know what I mean? Sometimes you feel like your problems are like really big, and you don't even know how you're gonna like deal with them and how you're gonna get through them. And at that moment, it was as if my problems were just like, oh my gosh, what am I worrying about? God is so big. God is huge. And as soon as you can try to define that feeling, it's kind of gone, because it doesn't last long, But I'll never forget that moment. I will never forget that moment on top of Mount Mansfield by myself, enjoying the view, and then feeling that, what I would call the peace of God that just kind of, hung on me. So, if you talk to a lot of people that have had like encounters with God, a lot of times it happens in nature. They see something that's really cool, or they're walking along and they feel something. And a a lot of people, if you talk to them, and we did a series actually last year where people talked about their experiences in nature and how it kind of, it was a God moment for them. So take a minute and just in that box on the left, on the bottom left, just write the coolest thing you've ever seen in nature. It doesn't have to be, you know, a big God story, but just the coolest thing you've ever seen. So that you can look back and go, oh yeah, that was the coolest thing. And then in the bottom box is kind of a wrap up for tonight. Just, you know, how do you feel about God's creation? Do you care about it? Do you want to protect it? Do you think we're making too much out of it? What do you think about it? Do you ever get out in it? Or you stay inside pretty much? So write your thoughts on there. When you're done writing, you'll want to get your reflection papers. So maybe I'll come around with those.